I've said it before, and I'll say it again now. The DB room straight up cost Texas A&M games in 2024. There were a lot of things wrong with the team, but you can point back to exact instances in games where getting burned on deep routes destroyed Texas A&M's chances of winning a football game. You had massive personnel issues at corner, where you were forced to start players out of position or play true freshmen that just weren't ready to play at the SEC level. You had inconsistent play at safety. And after last season, you lost a bunch of what was already a piecemeal room. Texas A&M will look to rebound in that position group with a host of new faces who entered the program mostly out of the transfer portal, adding a whopping 7 transfer DBs and 3 from the high school ranks, including 5-star talent Terry Bussey. When you talk about the 2024 version of the Aggie defense, there are some surefire contributors that come to mind. Up front, you have the Shamars, you have Nick Scorton, you have DJ Hicks, you have Torrin York as your middle linebacker and team captain. You have Bryce Anderson, who's back to take the helm of the free safety position. But in the rest of that DB room, it's really wide open. It's the Wild West. It's competition, competition, competition. So today, we begin our 2024 Texas A&M defensive preview videos with the DB room that Coach Mike Elko wasted no time in building in short order his first months at the helm at Texas A&M. But I'm not going to do this one alone. There are so many new moving parts added to the team. I needed to recruit some help. So in this video, I'll have Matthew Dawson of the Redshirt Sophomore podcast and of Texags. You may have seen him before. He's going to join and help us break down this very, very exciting new position group. Matthew and his brother CD are living encyclopedias regarding Aggie football and the world of college football overall. So if you haven't subscribed to the Redshirt Sophomore podcast, I highly recommend it. And that's exactly why we have him here today to help us break down all these new faces. So without any further ado, let's get into the video. And there he is, Matthew Dawson. Matthew, why don't you go ahead and start us off by introducing yourself and telling the people where they can find you.
Well, look, like you said, I'm Matthew Dawson. I have a podcast with my brother, Christopher Dawson. It's called the Redshirt Sophomore. You can catch us over there. Our preseason previews for every single Power 4 team is coming out in these weeks. So make sure you guys check those out if you're interested in understanding the dynamics of other aspects of college football, maybe not just Texas A&M. Because if you want Texas A&M sports, I mean, you're coming to Drew Tamu on the YouTube for sure.
I appreciate that, man. And yeah, I actually lean on them a lot when I'm trying to learn about, zoomed in aspects of other programs. They're really good. They really know their stuff. So I can't recommend them enough. But today we're going to ask him to zoom in onto the Texas A&M DB room, an exciting new room. You guys know a bunch of new names there, a room that needed some improvement based on the performance last year. So Matthew, been a journey since the firing of Jimbo Fisher, into the coaching search, into Mike Elko. Throughout that search, you had the lackluster DB room. You had players transfer out of what was already a pretty scarce room. You had players graduate, and then you're left with like an empty room. Essentially, you had a need in the portal for literally a secondary. Essentially, you needed everything, and I think at this point it's obvious that Elko passed that test with flying colors. He came in, he wasted no time. So I want you to go ahead and kind of tell us about what you see that he did. Like, what was the mindset? Did he get the players that fit the Elko system, the Elko, just the way he sees a DB? It seems like he went out and got his kind of players. Would you agree with that and kind of elaborate on what he did?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. People, if you remember, Tyreek Chappelle went into the portal, right? And Elijah Robinson was his primary recruiter, right? Like when Chappelle came, like that pipeline for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, like that was Elijah Robinson. So when Elijah Robinson went to Syracuse, there was a heavy lean that, he was going to end up there as well. And Coach Elko brought him back. But I also think Tyreek Chappelle doesn't always fit, he doesn't necessarily fit the mold of a normal Mike Elko DB, right? Like normal Mike Elko DBs are the tall, long, physical DBs that we've seen in the past, the Jalen Joneses, right? The Antonio Johnsons. And I think he got a lot of those big time guys in the portal. And also positional versatility is incredibly important to Mike Elko anywhere on the defense, right? In the front 7 and in the secondary, right? So Mike Elko getting those pieces that he knows that if we know that he can move those pieces around, like I trust Mike Elko to put people in the right positions for them, right? If you remember, he recruited Antonio Johnson as a safety. He played nickel. He recruited Jalen Jones as a safety. He ended up playing corner. Plenty of examples of that in Mike Elko's tenure at not only necessarily Texas A&M, but Wake Forest, Bowling Green, Duke, you name it, right?
Absolutely, man. And yeah, that goes back to, like you said, other position groups. If you think about his D lines that he had, 2020, 2021, those years, what he could do mixing and matching on third down packages, that was a staple of a Mike Elko defense. And it seems like the players that he added really fit his mold. They say when a coach comes into his program, it takes time for him to find his players. Well, it really seems like he forced the issue and got his players in short order at the DB room. So let's go ahead and get into the names here. Bunch of names added. Like I said at the beginning of this video, 7 portal additions and 3 true freshman additions, including 5-star Terry Bussey. But we're really going to highlight these immediate impact potential portal guys today. Obviously, you have guys that are still around, like Tyreek Chappelle, like Bryce Anderson, but I really want to get a good read on some of these guys coming in. So, Matthew, why don't you go ahead and highlight a few guys that you think should be at the top of our watch list going into the year? And we'll round out the room and kind of touch on everybody, but who do you think we should be keeping a dead aim on at the start of the year?
Well, I mean, I'll start with, Bryce Anderson. Okay. And I only bring him up because I know everyone watching this video knows who Bryce Anderson is and knows that he's a very good football player. All right.
Absolutely.
But he played a lot of nickel last year. And I don't know that that's going to be the position that he plays this year. I know, like, if you're checking our lads, you're like, wait, but he's a nickel on our lads. I think he's going to play safety. All right. And I think we need to be ready for that. And I think that is an upgrade over Damani Richardson. I think Damani Richardson, had his moments. He was Mr. Johnny. Hey, here's the ball, right?
Yeah.
Like, he found himself in really good positions, and he did a lot for that defense over the years. But I do think Bryce Anderson's ceiling at that position, at that strong safety position, is a lot higher, right? So I think Bryce Anderson playing safety, I think we could see a lot. Now, here's the thing: Mike Elko, he values the nickel corner position, right? So just because Bryce Anderson starts at safety doesn't mean he won't finish the season at nickel, and whatever. Like, we don't know what this entire secondary is going to look like, but I do believe that Bryce Anderson will be playing safety. So I do think that is a dynamic change there because you saw him play nickel so much and be pretty effective at it, despite his struggles occasionally in man coverage.
Yep, absolutely. And I think of the guys you have coming into the team, that's on the DB group, that's the one you can say, okay, I think that guy's on the field, play one. That's the guy that's on the field. But outside of that, it's really wide open. I mean, there's a huge competition happening across the board. And this spills from position to position because you touched on versatility. Most of the guys you added can play multiple positions. And that was obviously a priority with the targets. So of the new guys, who do you think we are very likely to see out there early and often next to Bryce Anderson?
I think you're going to see Will Lee out there. And here's the thing, like, I know everyone's like very high on Will Lee, and I am too, because let's remember this kid has played 1 year of Division I football. Okay,
Right.
1 year, and he was pretty dang good in his time. He made mistakes. All right, he did, as any first year Division I football player is going to make.
Sure.
Okay, but his length at 6'3", he put on a little bit of weight this year. Like, this is a guy that we could definitely see, match up with those physical wide receivers in the SEC. Because, like, I'm not going to say that the SEC has the most talented receivers like this year, but there's plenty of big, fast, physical receivers that I think Mike Elko wants to have to lean on, a bigger cornerback. And I think Will Lee could be that guy. Absolutely. And this guy that played safety in community college, high school, like, he could play anywhere, but he's going to play boundary corner. All right. That's just what it's going to be. He's going to have to lock down those big guys. But I mean, you saw the flashes last year, and you saw the flashes, in his community college highlights. Like, he has the potential to make huge impact plays all the time, right?
Absolutely. And Will Lee is obviously top of the list. He's one of the first DBs they got in the portal. And since he entered the program, he was always a candidate to be a day one starter. Another one that you added that you can't help but be extremely excited about, this one with a lot more eligibility left, is Des Ricks, transferring out of Bama, coming from IMG Academy before. Just checks every box of physicality and athleticism you could ever ask for in a corner. It's like a 4.5 40, like a 40-inch vertical leap. Like, this guy can do so much. He's just such a blank canvas to do great things with. And we know how Elko can develop DBs. So just speak to your excitement about Des Ricks. I mean, maybe he's a day one starter, but at worst, he's the future of the DB room. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about Des Ricks?
Well, and the thing about him too is, like, he's got, people like to talk about Eli Ricks and the negatives of Eli Ricks, but he's playing really well in the NFL right now. And that speaks to the traits that he had, and that once he had a coaching staff there that he was able to develop them, he was able to take that next step, even as a rookie in the NFL. And Des Ricks, people forget he reclassified.
Right.
Like, this kid is young. I mean, like, sure, he didn't see the field last year when there were two, first round caliber corners. I know Xavier or Cooley McKinstry went in the second round, but in Malachi, like, that DB room was loaded. Like, he was not going to see playing time that first year. And, bringing Holman Wiggins over, that connection there, I think kind of helped. I think Des Ricks has a potential to be fantastic, and it could be this year. It really, really, really could be
Sure.
because
Yeah.
we don't know who. I would assume that Chappelle starts at that one corner position, at least starts week one, right? Because he knows that defense. Mike
Hmm.
Elko trusts him. Arguably, his best year was his freshman year with Mike Elko on defense. But I do think Des Ricks, you can't help but not think that he's going to get some sort of playing time down the road. Like you said, the blank canvas, the athleticism, the explosiveness,
Hmm.
it's all there with Des Ricks. It
Great.
really is, and
Yeah.
people should be super excited about him.
Yeah, he shows great ball tracking capabilities in his high school tape, just great instincts. I mean, he has a lot going for him. You spoke on Tyreek Chappelle. Just quickly touching on him, I've never really seen Tyreek Chappelle through all the issues you've had at DB. I've never seen him as a liability. I don't think Tyreek Chappelle has ever been a negative player for A&M. I think the issues from last year stem from games where he was either out or the other corner position. I've never had an issue with throwing Tyreek Chappelle on the field, and I do see him as a very likely day one starter as well. But with that rotation being very interesting, I mean, do you agree about Chappelle? I think, yeah, if memory serves, he's never been the root of the issue at the DB room.
Yeah, his freshman and sophomore year, he was a lot more involved in the run game, and I don't know what happened in 2023 that
Right.
didn't allow for him to do that. Like I always thought that he was a very physical corner, and even though he's not undersized, but I think he's like what 5'11", 185. I don't think I ever saw him as like an elite physical corner, right? But I always saw him as a guy that you could rely on to make a tackle in the run game.
Yeah.
This last year, I just thought there were a little bit of struggles, and
Okay.
even on a couple plays down the field, I think he, maybe mistracked the ball a little bit, and got lucky on a couple plays. But I do think he is really good, and I do think that the comfortability of being in Mike Elko's defense again, I think you're going to see a huge, huge improvement from last year, right? So
Yep.
I don't know that you could see some of these other guys who maybe fit the mold a little bit more of a Mike Elko DB
Right.
eventually take that role. But I do think Chappelle is really good. And I think he stayed back for a reason. I think Mike Elko knows that he's a guy that he can depend on, and that's why he needed him back. So I do think Chappelle, I don't think he's a liability at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. I do think he's just going to improve from last year.
Makes a lot of sense. And Mike Elko, a DB coach in his own right. And speaking on the prototype Mike Elko DB, this is a guy that as I've gained more context and more knowledge about this player, I just can't help but get more and more excited about him this year and beyond. Marcus Radcliffe out of San Diego State. Bad San Diego State team, really good Marcus Radcliffe, hits the portal, comes to A&M. If you built a Mike Elko DB in a lab, I think it's Marcus Radcliffe. I think he checks every box. Huge physical, versatile player. I think he played like 3 different positions last year in the secondary. Talk about Marcus Radcliffe, man. I can't help but be super excited for this guy.
Dude. So for reference, he went to San Diego State. Okay. And, as a true freshman, CD and I, we were texting like every week, like,
Yeah.
dude, this guy is a stud. Like he's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And if you
Yep.
look at uh, not everyone's on San Diego State Twitter like I am, but if you go on San Diego
Nice.
State Twitter, right? The
That's why
moment
you subscribe to them, by the way. This guy's on San Diego State Twitter and other Twitter accounts you would never even think to be on. This guy's there. But sorry, continue.
thank you, I appreciate that. But like, it was a disaster season for San Diego State, right? And Brady
Yeah.
Hoke, leaves. His son actually is now on the coaching staff at Texas A&M. People didn't know that, but
Well,
Brady Hoke, he gets out, he retires, right? It was time, it was over, and they bring in Sean Lewis. And I don't think Marcus Radcliffe saw himself, a future at San Diego State. Because by the way, he was a high-rated prospect, and he chose to go to San Diego State, and because he's from San Diego, right? So it was like hometown kid, and he was huge. Like, what is he, like 6'3", like 200 pounds, 215 pounds?
yeah, I think he's close to like 220 on the latest roster. It's
He's
crazy.
massive, right? And
Yep.
he absolutely dominated at the Mountain West level as a true freshman. And then he goes to transfer portal, and then CD and I immediately text. I'm like, dude, Marcus Radcliffe is in the portal. Like,
Yeah.
where's he going to go? And he commits to UCLA. And D'Anton Lynn, if people don't know, he was the defensive coordinator at UCLA, and he was phenomenal last year, right? Which is why he got the job at USC. If people don't know, D'Anton Lynn also got the defensive coordinator job at USC this past year once Alec Grinch was fired at USC. And then all of a sudden, his recruitment opens back up. Marcus Radcliffe's
Hmm.
like, and it was very silent, right? He didn't decommit from UCLA. He actually just like all of us, like I started hearing rumbles that Marcus Radcliffe was coming to Texas A&M, and I'm like, CD, like we could be hearing a bomb in the next couple hours. And he commits to Texas A&M, and I could not have been more excited because this isn't just a 2024 kid. This is
Yep.
a 2025 kid. This is a 2026 kid. This is a guy, when you talk about positional versatility, size, speed, athleticism, physicality. Marcus Ratcliffe checks every single box that you could possibly want in a Mike Elko defensive back. And just because you don't see him on the field this year a ton, which by the way you might still,
Mm-hmm.
does not mean that Marcus Ratcliffe cannot be a superstar for this Texas A&M defensive team down the road.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I'm so high on this guy, and I feel like there are certain matchups where you could see a guy like that providing a lot of value to a team. Another guy, I mean, we're going through this room, and as you look at each name, it really you just feel the floor in this room raising compared to where it was last year. I mean,
100%.
you look at it last year, and you had Josh DeBerry out of position at corner. You were
Yeah.
forced to play Javen Thomas. You were forced to play Bravion Rogers at times. Those guys, promising players, probably not what you would want in your year one rotation yet. Need some time to cook. But now you just have so many options at each position. And a couple more guys I want to bring up for you because I get these questions about these guys all the time from my audience, specifically Trey Jones. Now, Trey Jones, I've found limited information about Trey Jones in my research. I've seen some highlight footage of him, but what I gather is like this is a man in a college football player's body right now. This guy's been in the college off-season program. It's like his sixth off-season as a college
Yeah.
player.
He's played
I
like
mean,
1,800 snaps.
it's crazy. He's just so experienced. He's using that COVID eligibility. He's a veteran. And you add him to the room, and I have people saying that guy's a day one starter potentially. And I don't know, man. I don't know much about that, but I just know he has a ton of pedigree, a ton of experience out of Central Michigan. What are your thoughts on Trey Jones the third?
So Trey Jones is a really interesting one because I think he could start, right? I say could because they are moving Bryce Anderson likely to safety. So that leaves that, the free safety spot open. And Trey Jones is more of a bigger box safety, if you ask me, although he's played snaps. He's played snaps in the slot. He's played at free safety. He's played at strong safety. And he's from Central Michigan, right? And over there, Rob Aggie, the defensive coordinator, very aggressive guy, right? Very aggressive defensive coordinator. Also has a great defensive coordinating staff there. And people might not think of Central Michigan as like a good defensive team, but like in the MAC, relative to like other teams in the MAC, like sure you have Miami, Ohio, you have Toledo, Ohio the last couple of years with Tim Albin, but like Central Michigan like has had a decent team. I know last year's team was pretty brutal defensively, but let me tell you, it was not because of the safeties at all, either one of them. So Trey Jones has the potential, I think, to really, really, really raise. He's a floor raiser, like you just said. Like he's a
Right.
guy that has experience playing against really good teams. Michael Zork there, the defensive backs coach, he has NFL coaching experience. He played in the NFL. I mean, like Trey Jones was not undercoached, right? He was developed, I think, pretty well. And I think that the staff can trust him. And when I see him out there at practice, he's a big guy. Like I know he's like 6'2".
Yeah,
I know Marcus
absolutely.
Ratcliffe is like supposed to be bigger than him, but like Trey Jones is like he's built. He is
Yeah.
built. Like he is an SEC football player in the sense where like I don't question his traits transferring over to the SEC. It's just going to be a question like, can he find his way onto the field? Like, I don't think he's going to play nickel necessarily, even though he could. He's played. I mean, last year he played like 160 snaps in the slot, so
Yep.
it's not a question that he couldn't play nickel. I just think that they like him at safety more. I think Central Michigan found out that they just liked him at safety more and just kind of stuck him there, kept him there. Kept playing more safety, more in the box as the years went on there. But I do think Trey Jones in immensely raises the floor, especially like if your DB room, fortunately, like up until fall camp, we haven't really had injuries, right? And that's
Right.
something you have to think because Tony Grimes last year didn't play,
Yep.
right? And like when you were talking about the floor of Texas A&M's defensive back room last year, Tony Grimes was a part of that conversation leading up to the season the entire time, and you didn't see him at all. So I think Trey Jones is a guy that you feel comfortable about, even if he doesn't start day one. One, he's going to push them. He's going to push to be a starter for sure. But I think he just raises the floor of like the backups if he doesn't end up starting for sure. Like Trey Jones, I think is a really good player as a floor.
Absolutely. And a couple other floor raisers. I mean, there's a few more names to get through. We'll kind of go through these last few quickly, but a couple other big upperclassmen, BJ Mays out of UAB, Jaden Hill out of Florida. Do these guys have a path to see early rotational snaps, or do you think these are some more, backup kind of guys? I mean, what do you see from Jaden Hill and BJ Mays?
So BJ Mays, I'll touch on him first because I actually like him in the stuff that I saw. And you could say like, oh, he didn't play against SEC. He played against
Right.
Georgia last year, guys. Okay, go back and watch that Georgia game. If you look at Mac McWilliams or whatever his name was on the other side, Mac McMichael, I forget his name, he was getting burned all day on that UAB,
Right.
burned. And if you looked at BJ Mays, like he was physical, right? He was not. I think Lad McConkey was hurt for that game, but Georgia, other than Lad McConkey, has some big physical receivers, and
Sure.
he matched up. He steps up in the run game. He makes tackles. 8 pass breakups last year, 2 INTs. He was targeted a bunch, but made plays on the ball, right? I think he's a really good athlete. I don't know if he's a starter. I think he could be. Like any of these corners, like cornerback 2, I think for week 1. Again, I think Tyreek Chappelle will start week 1, but I think that later on the road he could be beat out potentially. But I don't think you're going to see 2 guys there week 1. I think you could see BJ Mays getting in the rotation.
Yep.
I think Jaden Hill, I think he's going to play nickel. I mean, that's I think where he fits. But in terms of BJ Mays, I mean, he's another guy who gained 10 pounds this offseason, right? Like, I mean, the Tommy Moffitt
Yeah.
effect. We can go
Oh
on,
yeah.
on and on through the list of the
Absolutely.
entire roster
Mhm.
of people that have benefited from that. But he's a guy who played 600 snaps last year for, by the way, like, and played well with a high school defensive back. Like, the coaching staff that Trent Dilfer brought in there was a lot of the guys that, he brought from his high school days, guys that, maybe he worked with like as players in the NFL, but like not a ton of guys that I think were like the coaching staff that Mike Elko has brought in. Right. So I
Right.
think
Right.
BJ Mays has a chance to, not only has he put on the weight, but I think he just has a chance to get more well and better coached this year. I really do. Because
Absolutely.
again, that's another guy who's played 1 year Division I football. Because
Oh
before
yeah.
that, he was at Incarnate Word.
Yep.
And he played really well there as well. So
He's a
he's
climber.
he's 6'1", almost 200 pounds. Like, he's a guy that I think physically can match up with guys in the SEC because we've seen him do it. In a limited sample size, but it's Georgia, right? It's
Yeah.
Georgia.
Absolutely. So we talk about the nickel a little bit. You think Jaden Hill fits more of that nickel mold? It sounds like Radcliffe can definitely play nickel.
Yeah.
I think Chappelle got reps at nickel in spring. Is that right? Bravian Rogers got reps at nickel. I mean, who do you think
Yeah.
is rounding out this nickel rotation? I mean, it's very versatile. It could really be anybody.
It really could be. Like, there are positional versatility is the key word in this defensive back room. I do think it's Jaden Hill. He's got experience. I think he's physical. I think he can match up with a lot of guys in that slot. But there are some bigger, tight ends, slot guys. Depending on what packages you're going to bring in, I think you could bring in, even bigger guys than Jaden Hill to kind of fill that nickel role. I do think it'll be Jaden Hill week 1. I don't know for sure though, right? Like, again, like you said, everyone's kind of getting reps here. Everyone's getting reps in this nickel spot, and I think it's a not necessarily a revolving door, but the door is open for someone to take that spot. But I do think it's Jaden. I think he's pretty good. I don't think he was the weak link on that Florida defense that was like not great last year.
Sure.
I do think in that secondary, I think he was really effective. I don't think Mike Elko would have brought him in, or Jay Bateman or Sean Spencer, if they didn't think so as well, or at least see the potential here now that he's a senior and has plenty of SEC snaps.
Sure, absolutely. And at worst, again, a floor raiser. Now we've kind of
Exactly.
danced around a player who we're a little bit more familiar with in Dalton Brooks. Where do you think Dalton can slot in? Because he showed some potential in that bowl game. I mean, he got some reps kind of sparsely throughout the year, but he really kind of came on a little bit towards the end. Is there a space for him now? I mean, there's so many names in here. I mean, there are more mature guys than Dalton Brooks. I was high on him until you added all these guys. So where does he slot in potentially?
Dude, and the reason why I think that I'm not sure if Trey Jones is going to start is because I think Dalton Brooks might start.
Yeah.
Like, he's been that effective in practice. He was that good in the bowl game, right? But if you remember, up until the season, he played mostly nickel, right? Like in filler situations, right? But in the bowl game, he played a lot more safety, right? And I think Dalton Brooks, I think he's a good tackler, but I think, like, playing over the top, I think would have been, allowing him to play forward, I think would benefit Dalton Brooks in that spot. I mean, he's not like the giantest human being of all time, but he's so good, guys. Like, he is so good. And coming out of high school, you saw the athleticism, not just on the defensive side of the ball. Like, he was like an incredible on the offensive side of the ball. Like, the athleticism just jumps off the pages. I know people like to discredit the smaller schools like Shiner. It's like, come on, dude. Like, talent is talent. Like, Dalton Brooks is that dude. Again, I don't know for sure if he's going to start week 1, but damn, he will be in that rotation. 1,000,000,000%. Like, whether it's nickel or safety, but I believe it's going to be safety. And if I had to guess, it'd be that free safety spot.
And for whatever it's worth, Mike Elko was very complimentary of that safety room coming out of spring. And that was without Trey Jones in the building yet, because he wasn't there for spring. So that was the Dalton Brooks, Bryce Anderson, Jared Kerr as a rotational guy. I mean, does Jared Kerr even have a spot anymore? He's a guy who has a ton of experience here. So who knows? But he's an option. I know. It's crazy, man. It's crazy where we are now compared to where we were last year. So I guess we've kind of covered, I think we've touched on every name. Do you want to say anything about Donovan Saunders? He's another guy who's upperclassman, another big guy, another perfect mold for Mike Elko. Do you want to touch on him real quick?
Huge. Right?
Yeah.
What is he, 6'4"? I mean,
Yeah. I'll look it
he's
up. Yeah.
massive. Okay. But Donovan Sanders, he comes from Cal Poly. Okay. And,
Yep.
if you don't know a lot about Cal Poly football, they're pretty good. Okay. Like, they don't just bring in Joe Schmoes there. Maybe guys that were just overlooked, right? Donovan Saunders is a 2025, 2026 guy. Okay. Like, not that he couldn't see the field this year. I think it's just less likely that Donovan Sanders sees the field over some of these other guys. But Donovan Sanders definitely has a potential to see the field a lot down the road. Because if you remember, like the safety spot, you're really young, right? With the exception of like uh, Trey Jones, right? But the cornerback position, right? Chappelle, he's coming in on his senior year. You're looking at BJ Mays is in his senior year. Like there's some spots to be had in the future in that rotation. I don't think Mike Elko is just going to play two corners all game, right? Like a guy like Trey Jones last year played like 700 snaps. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see anyone play 700 snaps in the corner room, right? Like I think if I had to guess that we're going to see people 500 snaps, 400 snaps, kind of like what Will Lee did last year with Kansas State. I think that you're going to see a lot of fresh legs.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Donovan Sanders is going to crack that because there are so many names in this room. But again, another guy with a very high ceiling, just not sure his floor right now is ready to go in the SEC.
Yeah, and that's a great point, bringing up the amount of snaps for some of these guys. So let's kind of transition into what exactly is Mike Elko going to do with all these guys? I mean, you're going to have a starting group out there. You're going to have a group that earns the right to start in game one based on the performance in fall camp, pedigree before with Bryce Anderson, guys like that. But is this just a matter of keeping fresh legs out there? Is he going to mix and match based on the opponent? Could we just see totally different rotations based on the look you're getting? I mean, where does he go with this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's also up to some of the defensive staff that he has there. I think of the defensive line, we can say very confidently that there is going to be a rotation.
Right.
Um, and in linebacker, it could also you could at every single level of this defense, you could see positional rotations in the snap. Now, Mike Elko, as we know, is pretty aggressive, specifically in the front seven. Like you're asking the secondary to kind of do a lot. Now, granted, if you get to the quarterback, right, and you put pressure on him, you're not asking him to do as much. But it's a lot of high intensity reps for sure in that secondary. A lot of, there's some press man, but some off coverage, right? But you're asking these cornerbacks to play down and make tackles. Like if you are playing a corner in Mike Elko's defense, like you are going to be a good tackler. That's
Mm-hmm.
just what you're asked to do. So I think in that sense, I think Mike Elko is going to want to see a lot of rotations. And like last year, like Duke, they didn't have exceptional talent at the secondary level. In fact, a couple guys got injured there in the secondary, and they still had guys come in and have to make plays, and they ended up playing kind of a rotation down the stretch. So it's like I think we're going to see a lot of rotation in this DB room, which is why I say like week one, your starters week one are. I'm going to guarantee this, but there are no guarantees in college football. Your week one starters are not going to be your week 14 starters, right? And it might not even matter, right? You might see a guy like, I mean, you might see BJ Mays get 380 snaps, 400 snaps, which is, by the way, like a really good amount of snaps to have, and he might not even be a starter, right?
Yep.
Like that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super exciting because you kind of contrast that to some of Jimbo's teams. Felt like Jimbo's teams were at times top heavy. I mean, you were really, really talented. You got some really good recruiting classes, but a lot of those were really oriented at that defensive line, couple of receivers, couple of guys that really highlighted those groups. But this team in particular, and speaking beyond DB, it feels like you have so many options in so many places. I mean, you can look at the O line and look at the versatility on the interior there. And now Elko's saying a lot of those guys can shuffle out and play tackle. So you could be looking at a starting right tackle that's Armaj Reed Adams, then potentially Ruben Fothery backing him up. Ruben Fothery maybe swinging over to the left in case of emergency if something happens with Trey Zune. You have a huge shuffle that could happen in the interior of that O-line. You have the same thing happening in the DB room. Obviously, the D-line maybe 2.5, 3 groups deep at D-line. So many exciting new linebackers in the room. It's really going to be fun to see how deep he digs into the bag for the given matchup to match up to certain looks, to match up to certain players. He can do a lot. So just concluding this discussion on the DB room, I mean, compare it to where we were last year. I mean, I've been speaking towards it. Like, we had personnel issues. It was an issues of Jimmy's and Joe's in the DB room, in my opinion, last year. You didn't have enough options. You didn't have the high level of competition you're going to see this fall camp that's happening right now while we're speaking. I mean, what is the ceiling of this DB room? This feels like it could be a room that, goes from one of the worst in the SEC to one of the best.
Yeah, and I'll compare it even like the past couple years, right? Even like with Mike Elko, his first year without like last year, look, and I was mistaken, right? Like I really thought that secondary had a lot of pieces that were really good. But again, like you said, you had to play Josh DeBerry out of position, right? Chappelle was banged up, right? Then you had Tony Grimes, who was never able to see the field. And then you're playing Javon Thomas, who just, quite frankly, is a really good player, just was not ready as a true
Yep,
freshman. Was
exactly.
not ready. And I think, Damani Richardson wasn't able to necessarily he's not the kind of athlete that's going to be able to elevate the corners, right? Like he doesn't cover that much ground, and
Exactly.
despite being a really good instinctive player, I just don't think he had the speed, and he wasn't a threat. Like so these corners were really getting picked on game after game after game. Really starting with that. I mean, not starting with the Miami. I guess starting with the Miami game, but then
Sure,
also
yeah.
in the Alabama game. I mean, you just got picked on over and
Ole
over again.
Miss. I mean,
Ole
obviously
Miss.
LSU did it to everybody, but I mean, come on, they did it to us. They
Yeah.
destroyed us at the end of that game, just
Oh
picking on
yeah.
them.
Yeah. And then I want to go back to 2022, right? The first year without a Mike Elko, you actually had one of the best secondaries in the country, statistically, metrically, talent wise, right?
Yep.
But the problem with that was like you got lucky with injuries. Like you really did. Like Damani Richardson was stayed out. He had 782 snaps. Jordan
Mhm.
Gilbert had over 700 snaps. Tyreek Chappelle had almost 700 snaps. Jalen Jones had 600, and you did miss him in a couple games, but it just felt like they were able to kind of fill that void there with a really good pass rush at certain times. I just thought that 2022 secondary, you got lucky with injuries. And same thing happened in 2022 with Mike Elko, who, by the way, played Tyree Chappelle and Jalen Jones and Antonio Johnson all over 700 snaps. So I think, you know, like you said, the floor of this room, kind of fell underneath us last year. But this
Mhm.
year, you have a stable floor where if some injuries happen, like fortunately, they didn't happen in 2021 and 2022 when you had a pretty good secondary.
Yep.
But you saw it come off the wheels in 2023 when you just didn't have those guys behind those, your studs. You had some
Yep.
studs, and then you had guys that were either duds or were not ready.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. And you're right. I think the main thing is the floor is elevated with this room. It's just the experience and the depth that just stabilizes the entire room. He brought in a DB room, essentially. He brought in an entire DB room, exactly what he wanted. So many guys to his mold, so much of his dudes. You don't get that in a year one coach too often, especially in the past before the transfer portal era. I mean, you bring in 25 guys in the portal, and he handpicked these DBs. He's a DB guy. And they're also going to be elevated by the fact that A&M should have a pretty nasty third down pass rush package. I mean, the depth and versatility on the D line just to get after it with four. I mean, it's really exciting stuff for this Texas A&M defense. Well, all right, Matthew, I appreciate you coming on, man. Tell us one more time where they can find you so the people can go and follow Matthew Dawson and Chris Dawson. Tell the people where you're at.
You can find us on the Redshirt Sophomore on YouTube and Spotify if you want everything college football, right? All teams, we're going to be covering during the season. We got MAC games on our preview list. We got Mount West games on our preview list. If you want to hear all about that kind of sports, that side of college football, you can catch us on the Redshirt Sophomore.
Get in there, sickos. I know you're here. I've seen you out there. Come on, guys. Get in there. All right, Matthew. I appreciate your time, man. Let's have a hell of a year. It's going to be a lot of fun. Gig 'em.
Gig 'em.